Francis, born in 1896, St. Paul, Minnesota, and Oksana, shut up. He was a poor kid in St. Paul, Minnesota, living in a wealthy area. Must have been very strange to him. It was a rented house, and everyone around him was new money, very wealthy, and he was just poor. And he felt poor, and he was depressed, and he was down. So his family moved to Buffalo. Lousy house, rented. Poorest kid in a wealthy neighborhood. Sound familiar? He felt the same. They went back to St. Paul. Poorest kid in a wealthy area. Life was tough for Francis. So they sent him to the Newman School in Hackensack, New Jersey, a boarding school. And then he made his way to Princeton University. Started to open up a little bit in Princeton. Believed he could actually write. And he started writing for the school paper. And then life was to take a very interesting turn for Francis. Because until that point, he had been feeding the wrong wolf. And then on Christmas vacation, while at Princeton his sophomore year, went back to St. Paul, where he met Geneva King, 16-year-old heiress to one of the wealthiest fortunes in Chicago. And he was a poor kid in St. Paul. But they fell in love. And it wasn't brief, and it wasn't quick, and it lasted for over 2 years. When he went back to Princeton, she relocated her school to Westport, Connecticut, so the two could meet every weekend in New York City. Life seemed really good. Francis was up. He was happy. He was upbeat for the first time. He was with the woman he loved. And finally, after a couple of years, approaching his senior year at Princeton, he mustered up the nerve. Bought a ring. Did the whole routine. Got down on one knee, looked up at Geneva, and asked for her hand in marriage. Her response would change his life. Her response would change the literary world forever. Her response would change the world. She laughed at him and said, "Rich girls don't marry poor boys, Francis. Rich girls don't marry poor boys." And Francis was crushed. Started feeding the wrong wolf. Oh, the wrongest wolf. Got drunk every night. Carried a gun so he could take his own life at any time. Came up with something brilliant. I don't have enough courage to commit suicide, so it's World War I. Let me join the army, go to the Western Front, and get killed. That's easy. That's simple. That was his plan. That was what he wanted to do with his life. And he did. He joined the military. And while training, they sent him down to Montgomery, Alabama, where he met Zelda Sayre. Zelda looked like Geneva. Zelda was a wealthy debutante, like Geneva. Oh, folks, when you try to reproduce your past, you are feeding the wrongest wolf imaginable. And he asked for Zelda's hand in marriage. And you know what she said? No. Rich girls don't marry poor boys. 2 times in 2 years, 2 rejections, same rejection. Now, he went to the Yale Club and told his friends he was jumping off the ledge. Literally. Now, suicide became a serious option for him, but all of a sudden, he changed wolves. He said, "Well, I'm a writer, and I'm in so much pain. How do I get it out of me? How can I use this pain to write?" And he wrote a book called This Side of Paradise, and he became a best-selling author. 43,000 copies in the first 3 days in 1919. Think about that, folks. 43,000 copies in 3 days in 1919. And now he was one of the most celebrated authors in America. He called back Zelda Sayre. I'm rich. I'm famous. I'm successful. And she said, yes, I'll marry you. Boy, wrong wolf times 2. Okay? He was still in love with Geneva King. This marriage was doomed. Oh, was it doomed? It was doomed from the very beginning. So doomed, he became a drunk again. She became a flirt, a drunk, and really a child in an adult's body who would eventually lose her mind and be incarcerated for being mad. But while this was happening, we went back to the other wolf again. These experiences are terrible. I don't love my wife. She doesn't love me. She's having an affair with a French aviator. And he wrote another book called The Beautiful and the Damned. Sold a lot of copies, over 40,000 in the first day. He was rich again. He was even more famous and happy for just a little bit. But Zelda was losing her mind. He was getting drunk again. And he felt that deep down inside him was a magnum opus. He felt that deep down inside he could write a work that would change the world. And in 1924 and 25, he began writing. He stopped drinking. He focused all his time and energy. He had lived in Westport. He had lived in Great Neck. As a famous author, he was now living the life he dreamed he would always lead. And yet deep down inside, he had a resentment for the wealthy. He had a resentment for those with old money who treated everyone else like they were garbage on the side. And he didn't know how to get it out, and he began writing. And you have to believe that very few authors could write the way Francis wrote. The end of that book went something like this. He had come a long way for this blue lawn. And his dream must have seemed so close that he could hardly fail to grasp it. But he did not know that his dream was already behind him. The Great Gatsby by F. Scott Fitzgerald. Sometimes you have to understand what wolf you're feeding and what wolf you should be. Because F. Scott Fitzgerald died in 1940 at the age of 44. Technically, the reason was a heart attack, but the honest reason, he drank himself to death. The Great Gatsby sold 23,000 copies. That's not a great number. It was critically acclaimed, but the audience didn't seem to like it. And when he died in 1940, he died penniless, and he died, in his mind, a failure from feeding the wrong wolf. But the book lived on. 1942, World War II, the Army sent out books to any soldier who requested, and there was one book that almost everyone in the Army wanted to read, and it was called The Great Gatsby. So much so they had to reprint copies of this book. In 1960, 20 years after F. Scott Fitzgerald died, The Great Gatsby sold 100,000 copies that year. In time, it has sold over 40 million copies. Feed the right wolf, live forever. Which brings me to my next speaker. A few years after I ditched a $49 blue polyester suit at Bond's Men's Store, I met another friend for life. He's a young lawyer, up and coming, wanted to start his old firm. I was starting my own broker-dealer, and we started speaking one night. This was in Westchester. Two young guys, great ambition, and you might imagine, what were they speaking about? What were we talking about? In your mind, you might think all the money we were going to make, the big houses we were going to buy, the big cars we were going to drive. That wasn't the conversation at all. Because what Andy, Karlen, and I began speaking about that night would stay with us forever. It was truly the right wolf. We spoke about not how much success, but the type of success. A success built on honesty and integrity. A success built on a business that can live beyond our own lives because it was on the solid foundation. A success that was built on the contributions that Andy and I might deliver to the world as a result of our focus to save the world, not savor the world. That was a long time ago, folks, and in that long number of years, Andy and I have followed up with each other almost every year or more frequently to make certain that we stayed on target to the commitments we made that evening up in Westchester. And I can tell you that Andy stuck to those terms, and it never changed. He was a lawyer with integrity. That's almost an oxymoron in this time and place. But he was. Focused all his talent and ability on business continuity because as it was for he and I, he wanted his clients' businesses to live forever. And he recognized that a lot of his clients would sell their business and retire. But some of them were like me. They were going out on a gurney, no other way. And he wanted those businesses to continue. Andy has been an inspiration my entire life. My attorney, very proud of that fact, and one of the best human beings I've ever met. Andy Karlen.
Incidentally, Steve, I just learned about this yesterday, that in New York City is something called the Museum of Failure.
I would love that museum.
Yeah, and I think, failure which was then followed by success.
Always.
So Stephen alluded to the story, and I'm reminded that earlier this week we had a visit, my wife and I had a visit from our son who's 44. Unfortunately, he didn't bring the grandchild, but that's another story. It got me to thinking, when Jonathan he wasn't even a toddler yet, Steve met with us and he came in his second suit. Financially, it wasn't a meeting of great import, but I walked away with the feeling that Stephen was something special. And Stephen, nothing in the last 40-something years has happened that would change that. Talking to Steve is like a big dose of the right wolf. So I've kind of always viewed adulthood as years and years of trying to figure out what you want to be when you grow up, and hoping that when you figure it out, you're young enough to still do it. And so my passion came along later, and it's exit planning. Let's talk about the simplest definition. It's simply designing and implementing a plan so that a business owner can leave his or her business on their own terms. Easy to say, not always so easy to do. What does own terms mean? Well, it means on a date of their choice, to the successor of their choice, and with the amount of cash necessary for the chosen post-business lifestyle for the rest of their lives. And in addition, many owners have what I call legacy goals. Treat the employees well, the ones that helped you build the business, keep the business in the community, pass wealth to the next generation, or sometimes not pass wealth to the next generation. So the journey that got me here, what exit planning meant for me, and I almost didn't follow up on it, but I'm so glad that I did. It's a platform that brings out the counselor at law side of what a lawyer does. I've never been as good as I would like to have been on the technical aspects of the law. Yes, I did it and I'm okay. But where my passion truly lie was with the counseling side, making a difference in people's lives. So I'm sure you've all heard the term exit planning, and now I've told you what it is. Why is it so important? Well, for one thing, every business owner will someday leave the business. Hopefully upright, but not always. And typically, the business is the business owner's largest and at the same time most illiquid asset. History has made it even harder. In 1945, the GIs returned from war. They had a lot of living to make up for and to start their new lives. And one area in which they made up ground very quickly was making babies. So they gave us what we know as the baby boom generation. Baby boomers are people born between 1946 and 1964. They were the largest, and up until recently stayed the largest in terms of number generation ever. And as the boomers aged, when the boomers started to reach a certain point, there was always significant economic fallout from that because they were so large. So the boomers went to college, but when they came out of college, there were not enough jobs in corporate America for all of them. So what did they do? They started businesses. Various kinds, various sizes, franchises came out of that. A lot of baby boomer businesses, and now they're retiring. Now at this point, the youngest boomers are in their late 50s. So there's a lot that has gone on. But the chances of a successful sale of business, there's a lot going against the owner. And understand that many of these folks need the money from the value of their business to live their chosen lifestyle. Well, one thing is that most owners don't really understand business values, and they tend to think their businesses are worth a lot more than they really are. There's a lot of heartache and a lot of disappointment. Most businesses that are for sale don't sell. Another statistic that really strikes me is that a year after a survey by the Exit Planning Institute showed that A year after exiting, 75% of business owners were unhappy with their exit. As it turns out, money is not the distinguishing factor in most of these situations. One big issue, and very hard to, when you want to work with a business owner, is to design, to be able to visualize, to be able to touch, feel, and smell your post-business life. So critical. I recently had an owner we were talking to and asked that question, and asked him, next time we meet, like an estimate of what you really need to spend in retirement. He came back and he said $125,000 a year. And I'm thinking, yeah, well, what about the other 11 months? Totally unrealistic. So what exit planning can do and does is it provides a process or a sequence of steps that can lead to that successful exit. Now, I personally am involved in 2 platforms. The first was Business Enterprise Institute, and they have a 7-step exit planning process, and I'm still very involved with them. Their stuff is still great. And I've got, you know, they give a certification, CEXP, and I have that, and man, I worked hard to get that. This is, you know, not a setup. This was really hard. BEI process takes you through logically. The other one is the Exit Planning Institute. Their process, any of the processes are going to be some amalgamation of pretty much the same things. Exit Planning Institute takes the view that we're not going to require the business owner to set a date. We're going to grow business value so that the owner can retire or not retire whenever they choose. So there is that greater emphasis on growing business value. But I'm going to use, oh, incidentally, let me stop and just say, if this gets too long, don't be afraid to tell me. I'm reminded of a story that a rabbi told. The rabbi had given a sermon, went really long, and people instructed the synagogue president to speak to the rabbi and see if he could tone it down. And not easy to tell that to a rabbi. So what he said is, you know, Rabbi, that sermon you gave last weekend was so good that the local radio station wants you to repeat it on air. But the problem is, they only have a half an hour, of which you'll only have about 25 minutes. Can you shorten it? And he said, sure, I can shorten it. Well, then why the heck didn't you? Now, there's a third system that I want to remember, and this is what I mentioned. This is really ingenious. One of the problems with exit planning is it can be very expensive and therefore only available to more substantial, the owners of more substantial businesses. The exit map is designed to bring exit planning to Main Street. And I happen to know that the one who developed it, a fellow named John Deeney, and kind of like Stephen, if you've ever heard the term thought leader, he is. But what this does is you can go to my website and there will be a link to assessments, exit map assessments. Within a few days, the owner and I will get reports, and it covers essential areas of business and points out strengths and weaknesses, and then I will sit with the client and debrief them, and hopefully out of that can arise an engagement. But what's really good about it is it brings exit planning to Main Street. So let's look at this process. And when I say process, I'm not advocating any particular one. These are just things that will come up in a typical engagement. Most processes in anything start with setting objectives, setting goals. For some owners, this can be the hardest thing, and particularly setting a date that they're going to leave their business. And I know I am very careful at telling us, you don't have to do this. You know, we can basically do until death do us part plan. You know, the plan will be for how the business continues or disposed of when you're no longer able to run it. So try to remove that pressure. And keep in mind, business owners get a big dopamine rush making decisions. They're very good at it. They are not very good at other people make decisions for them. So it can be very, very difficult to pin them down. It's also not easy for an owner to actually project into the future. How much money are they going to need for retirement? Particularly since they don't know how long retirement's going to be. And statistically, people are living longer and longer. So I encourage, and the right thing for them to do is to go and sit with a good financial planner and develop a financial needs analysis. Then there's the choice of successor. And I'll get to the different exit paths in a while. So those are the three goals. One place where they can really get hung up on goals is when it's a family-owned business. All sorts of permutations and combinations, but typical example is I've got 3 children. One of them is involved in the business, the other 2 are not. I want the one that's in a business to have the business, but at the same time, I've got to be fair to the other 2. And the other 2 are very likely to express their opinion about what the word fair means. So that can be really a really emotionally loaded kind of conversation. And I'm working with one lady right now. I mean, she's a marvelous lady. She's got 3 great kids, but she really can't commit herself to when she's going to leave or who's going to do what or get what in the business. And for that reason, we've been meeting with her on and off for 12 years. And I feel really empathetic or compassionate towards her, but there's not much we can do. We say all the right things, but there's gonna, it's kind of like we've heard the light bulb has to want change. That's where we are with her. So establishing objectives is very hard. Next, we've got to calculate what are our assets? What are our non-business assets? What is our interest in the business worth? So we're going to find out what our assets are. However, most of the time, the financial needs analysis, the amount of money in cash needed to retire, exceeds personal assets plus current business value. The only place that gap can be made up is from the business, to grow the business. So that's where exiting isn't just leaving, it's creating the nest egg And that has to be driven by the business. There's nowhere else to get that money. So how do they do that? Well, we use the term value drivers, but you've heard that before. Some of the real important ones, first of all, a stable and competent management team. Secondly, the business should not be owner-centric, meaning that it should not be dependent on the owner. We'll ask them, when was the last time you took 2 weeks off and didn't have to call the office every day? Now think about it. If you're a potential buyer, do you want to buy a business that's all in that owner's head? Or does not have a management team around him, and those things kind of go together? So that'll really kill value. And again, we come back to this issue, so important for the owner to really internalize where they're going next. Because if you don't have an idea of where you're going next, it's awfully hard to just set an arbitrary date. And most won't do it. Also, getting back to the owner centricity, best thing an owner can do is make him or herself irrelevant to the business. I'm working with a gentleman right now, and he says, they don't really need me in the business. Well, why are you still working 65 hours a week? So those are probably two of the biggest things that are going to impact value. Now, business valuation is very subjective. There are professionals, lots of them, that have valuation certification. So I always urge owners to use one of them. The problem with them is that they're very expensive, and it can cost like $25,000 for some valuations. That's the one where, let's say it's a divorce situation and you need the business valuator to testify in court, or it's a tax case in tax court and you're challenging an IRS determination. There are lower levels of service that will give the information necessary so that we have a baseline of business value. But that can be a shock. So we use those value drivers, and they take years to implement. Some of the important things I just talked about, stable and committed management team. Well, that's great that you have one. But if you leave, you don't want them to leave. And you particularly don't want them to take all the customers with them when they leave. So it comes under the heading of golden handcuffs. Some of the techniques, something called the stay bonus, meaning a key management person, if I die or have to leave, you will get a substantial bonus if you stay for 2 years past that, so that the next buyer will have the benefit of your knowledge and services. Another technique might be deferred compensation. But the idea is to condition receipt of a really good portion of that money to staying with the company. There are horror stories of a business owner that didn't do that, agreed to sell the company, and in the morning of the closing, the key employee, maybe the key salesman who has all the customers, comes in and says, okay, where's my million? So you don't want to put yourself in that kind of position. As I said, if it's a family business, it's just loaded with issues. One thing about exit planning that actually appealed to me is that it is very collaborative. Think about it. There is no one advisor that has all of the expertise necessary to deal with an exit plan. An exit plan should deal with and give equal attention to the owner's personal life, personal finances, and the business, because all three are necessary and they need to all be aligned to come out with a result that will truly make the owner happy and get the best value out of the business. So an advisor team will almost always include the CPA and the financial planner, an evaluation person, possibly a business consultant, going on and on through the different types of advisors, sometimes a family business consultant. So it's very collaborative, and one of my jobs as exit planner is not only to help form that team, but to manage their work, to hold them accountable if they say they're going to do something, that it's actually going to get done on time. So that's a critical part of it. Well, anyway, we know we have to grow business value. So what's the actual exit strategy? Kind of divided into two broad categories, inside and outside. Inside, sale to children or key employees or management. For example, outside, sale to a third party, for an example. They each have their pros and cons. The sad situation from my perspective is when an owner feels that the only alternative is to sell to a third party and the business just is not prepared for that kind of transfer. For transfer to take place, the owner has to be ready and the business has to be ready. And then it has to be timed. For example, what is the state of the private capital market at the time? You want to time that also. I think it's still true that the majority of transfers are inside to management or key employee or children. There's a big problem with that though. They never have any money. So what we do is we devise plans where basically we provide them with the steps and things that need to be done to grow the business, and they share in that growth, so that at the proper time, between the amount they've bought and the wealth they've amassed, they can go to the bank and finance the buyout, the complete buyout of the owner on their own credit. But those things take years. Tax strategies that you might want to use take years. Certainly gifting strategies, and as I just mentioned, gradual sales. If a business owner comes to me and says, I want to exit next Thursday, there isn't that much that I can do. So that's what I love the insider plans, because sort of taking people that have no money and putting them in a position to own a successful business, and at the same time allowing the current owner to cash out. It doesn't get much better than that. Next thing I want to mention, and this is critical, continuity. In its simplest form, what happens if the owner gets hit by a bus? But there are different circumstances which would cause the owner to leave, and there's a lot of details that need to be taken care of. Big one. What if the owner has personally guaranteed the business credit line? The bank may treat that as a default. So certainly, working with the company's banker so that in the event of the owner's sudden departure from the business, the company's credit can continue. Little things like, who should it be that informs the customers? Just think of everything, who is going to have authority in the various different areas? What's going to happen to the business? What are the owner's wishes? I want it sold, I want it liquidated, or I want the employees to have it, or my family to have it. That is critical because, think about it, if the owner gets hit by that proverbial bus Saturday night, what's going to happen Monday morning? Who's going to turn on the lights? Who's going to deal with the banker? Who's going to deal with the other employees, the customers, all of the other people that are stakeholders in the business? So can't overemphasize that. And we use assessments to try to identify those gaps and actually write down the plan for what will happen. And I should mention that an exit plan is a written document. It's a living document. It starts small and amended as the planning progresses. Again, the BEI form and the Exit Planning Institute form may be different, but it gets you to the same kind of result. And they're both excellent. So the last thing is personal estate and wealth planning. Critical. I don't know what more you need to say about that. Hopefully they've embarked on that long before the time of exit, but it really is critical. So those are the kinds of things that will arise in most exit plans. I have a great slide presentation, but I haven't used it, which is probably good for your benefit. But I think I've given you an idea of what it's all about, but I always come back to the importance of it. Look, every owner is going to die someday, and this is going to be your largest asset, and the way you leave is going to profoundly affect your business, your family, and possibly your community. So we have to keep those realities in mind at the same time as we're dealing with owners who may be feeling that dopamine rush and thinking that they're invincible at a particular time. But we all know young people do die, tragedies do happen. So I'm happy to stop here unless anybody's not tired of listening to me. But does anybody have any questions? Yes?
So I'm actually planning to start buying businesses this year. And I guess I'm curious, what size businesses are you generally working with? Are financing those as well? Or just, as someone who is planning to start buying this year, I'm curious.
Well, all sizes. Like, like I said, this exit map, is specifically designed for smaller businesses. So businesses of all sizes, but, probably not the business that's going to do an IPO.
Sure.
Are you going to be involved in venture capital?
No, I mean, I would be buying it personally. I mean, maybe do SBA loans to do something.
The answer is yes, he will eventually be involved in it.
I mean, I own an ad agency, so I'm using the cash flow from that to buy other businesses, or that's the plan.
I'd be happy to talk with you more in detail,
Right.
but have you sort of gotten an idea of what I would suggest? Design a target business. Maybe you already have one in mind, because it's much easier to talk about these things with something specific in mind than to just leave it broad, and it'll help your thinking.
We'll have to connect afterwards.
Oh, please, I'd love to. And I'm going to leave my card, but any other questions?
Andy, that was outstanding.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And thank you all.
The wolf you feed. How about the greatest food for the greatest wolf? Comes with a little bit of an admission. For someone who grew up, or most of us growing up in the 60s and 70s, my musical taste seemed to be with everyone else in my generation. God, I loved turning up Jimi Hendrix and driving my parents insane. That was fun. But I had a secret love of a music that was incredibly uncool in the 1960s and the 1970s. I loved to listen to Frank Sinatra. And I still do. And if anyone doesn't like it, tough shit. But there was one Frank Sinatra song, just one, I really disliked. Because it evoked an image, in my head at least, of some sleazy little bastard tiptoeing out of a hotel room at 3 a.m. in the morning. I didn't like this song. And I never realized that one day I would discover that this song is probably the greatest love story ever written. That this song is about the greatest food for the greatest wolf. Giorgio Calabrese, lying on his deathbed in Rome, in a coma. Doctors had already pronounced he will never will he get out of that coma, ever. He's just going to die. His wife of 60 plus years sat by his side holding his hands. They begged her, go home. We'll let you know when it happens. Just go home. She refused. She was not going to leave under any circumstance. None. And after a few days of this, she got totally exhausted and conked out next to him in the bed. And when she awoke, Giorgio was dead. But through a process I don't understand medically, and I never will, Giorgio Calabrese did not just die from that coma. Apparently he woke up, maybe for a few minutes, maybe even for a few hours. And he saw his wife, his lifetime companion, lying next to him. And he had to leave her a message. So he reached over to an end table with his left hand, he was not left-handed, and he scribbled down some notes. They were just words, but they were words so beautiful that Frank Sinatra sang them. And the words were, softly I believe you, but my heart would break if you should wake and see me go. So I leave you softly, long before you'll miss me, long before my arms can beg you stay for one more hour or one more day. After all these years, I can't bear the tears to fall. So I'll leave you softly. So I'll leave you there. If that's the food you feed your wolf, what an incredible life you'll lead. I will see you all next year. Thank you.